There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. I'm here with an illustrious, one of my very most favorite guests I've ever had on my channel, and it's particularly delightful to have him come back to talk about his second novel, and that is Rónán Hession and his second novel, Panenka. Welcome back, Rónán.
Hi, Sean. Good to see you again, and thanks for having me.
Just awesome. So you're just coming off, or in fact, I think the high is probably still ongoing. Your first novel, Leonard and Hungry Paul, is the one book, Dublin one book?
Yeah, the one Dublin one book. So every year the city authorities pick one book as a sort of reading project for the city. So Leonard and Hungry Paul was this year's choice. So I was very honored to do this. It's the first time they've chosen a debut. And in the first few years of it, they chose, books from the canon. So some of the big names, James Joyce, Oscar Wilde, etc. But they've started doing more contemporary writers. So it was a real honor to do that this April.
Or I think we could spin that a different way. That it just means that you are in the canon, Rónán.
Yeah, or being shot out of the canon, maybe. Yeah,
that's fantastic. And when is that, are events for the one Dublin one book ongoing, or it's finished?
It's mainly focused around April. So it's kind of an April reading project. So it's just finished, but it was great timing because Panenka came out a couple of weeks ago. So that had only finished and lots of people had discovered my writing for the first time. And so hopefully it helps people take an interest in Panenka too.
Awesome. I thought we'd get started with reading. I'd like you to read the opening page and set it up however you'd like before you do that.
Okay. I'm just going to read from the first page of chapter 1, Panenka. His name was Joseph, but for years they'd called him Panenka, a name that was his sadness and his story. These past months, the pressure pain in his head had been coming almost every night, building like an Atlantic wave that roiled within his dreams until it broke and crashed through his sleep, shocking him awake. It manifested as a clamp on his face. Working at bone level, it would spread from the crease between his eyebrows, around the orbits of his pounding eyes, and onwards to his jaw, which would stiffen and lock with tension. He called it his iron mask. With his palms of his hands pressed against his cheeks, he would run to the bathroom to compress his face against the cool, hard side of the bath, barely relieving the nerves that had Mayday signals pulsing through them. In its own time, and on its own terms, the iron mask would eventually lift, allowing the last few ripples of pain to subside and returning Panenka to the unclaimed hours somewhere between late night and early morning. Exhausted, he would haul himself up, his legs all fizzy and useless, and limp back to bed, thinking hungrily about the few hours of sleep that remained. Pulling the duvet up as far as his cheek, which bore no bruises or scars, no evidence of the silent violence, he would catch a bubble of thought passing through his mind. Was this time worse or the same as the last? Was the pain spreading or different? But he had learned to ignore these questions. The iron mask was unknowable in any real sense and beyond any bargaining.
So that is an arresting opening. And Panenka's got some very serious medical issues.
Yeah, the basic setup for the book is that Panenka is a man who's aged 50. He's a former footballer or soccer player. He is estranged from his adult daughter, Marie-Therese, and they've recently become reconciled. And she lives together with him and her son, Arthur, who's 7 years old, and Panenka's grandson. They live a sort of improvised family life. And Panenka carries a lot of sort of pain and difficulty from his past, and he's also facing a very uncertain future. And really what the book is about is life's unfixability. So often when we think about our lives, we think about what are the problems and we try and solve them. And it tries to look at what can be a path through life when those things are not solvable. And who are the people in our lives that can help us sort of see ourselves in a different way.
And so it's a narrative very much about human connection and failed connections. Maybe failed is not the right word, but challenging connections, new connections, healing connections. I would like to start my questioning, Rónán, with you're such an empathetic writer, and your fiction is so incredibly humanistic, humane, deeply psychologically insightful, yet it is not at all, not one phrase is sentimental. So how do you do that?
Well, I'm glad you say that. I think first of all, the empathetic bit comes from when you're trying to find insight. I think a lot of writing, a lot of art, in fact, is about insight. So those things that are true but not commonly understood and have to be really discovered. And writing is a good way of discovering them. And if you judge your characters, that makes that less possible, because judgment involves sticking with your pre-existing knowledge, your pre-existing perceptions. And so as a writer, you sort of sit down and initially you do judge your characters, and then you try and go beyond that, so that when the reader experiences the character, they experience beyond judgment. So that's the empathetic side of it. In terms of the sentimentality and avoiding that, I think a writer never really knows whether they've pulled that off. I think there is one of the recurring themes in my reading when I see things that were almost good and just fell short is sort of a mishandling of poignancy, going for it too early, too often. And I prefer poignancy to be incidental to what's mainly going on, rather than the actual point of a particular scene or a point of a particular character. Because poignancy can be a little bit manipulative. So you have to be very careful how you use it. And I think the balance I try to find is to say, I suppose you're relying a little bit on what you hope is realism. You're trying to see where could these characters plausibly go, and whatever the sort of poignancy is there comes from looking at that sensitively, rather than putting them in a situation where, you know, their kitten gets run over by a motorbike and they're left lifting the kitten's carcass bury it under a bed of roses or something like that.
So spoiler alert, that didn't happen in this novel.
That's in my next book, you know. but essentially, I like my books, both in my reading and my writing, to have some sort of emotional current to them. But also there are risks to that, because it can be very juicy to write about and read about, and you can overdo it. So it's just a writing discipline. And to be honest, as a writer, you're just hoping that you judge it right. There isn't really a clear test you can use before you send a book out in the world.
I think it's very subjective. So it didn't press any of my overly sentimental buttons. So no, I thought it pitched perfect. To me, Panenka's story is very much about shame. Is that a word that resonates for you about this book?
Yeah, and actually one of the books that was on my mind at the back of it was Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee. When I read that book, I thought to myself, oh, what an interesting subject. And then it went on to be a different book to what I thought it would be. It became a book really about people who had actually done bad things and had actually sort of in a way deserved what they got, and how that sort of played out. Whereas what I was interested in Panenka is when somebody does something wrong and they almost all the negativity becomes internalized. Like for the things that go wrong with Panenka in his younger life, there aren't many manifestations of that later in life. You know, it's largely his own internal punishment and his own decision to take the responsibility for that and to punish himself over time. And I often see that, like so much of what I write about, it's a preoccupation that I would have come across, not for the purposes of writing, just noticing how slow people are to forgive themselves, to reset themselves, to let go of things, to process things, and the way in which people carry around and nurse those sort of feelings over a very long period of time. And you get to a point, I'm 45 now, I get to a point where I say, you know, if you're at my age and you're still processing your childhood, you don't really have enough time to process, you know, everything. Like it's like the Diary of Tristram Shandy, you know, where it takes him more than a day to write each entry. So mathematically, he can never complete the diary. You know, it takes him a week to fulfill a day, so he will always be behind. So likewise in life, you're building up so much stuff all the time. And there isn't an obvious mechanism to sort of reset or to try and let yourself get on with your life. if you're not careful, you can spend much of your middle years and later just carrying stuff that has to be put down at some stage. And I wanted to look at that. So it is, I think shame and disgrace were very much there, but also looking at there's the initial mistake and the consequences, but the tail of it's so much longer than any consequences, the personal tail of it. And how do you deal with that?
And I think part of it is, if I've learned anything from your book, and I think I've learned a lot, is that it's just accepting that there are some choices that that you've made in the past, and the word that you've used in the book and already in our conversation tonight is on fixability. So one of my very most favorite sentences in the book, which is going up on Twitter as soon as we finish talking tonight for my Sunday sentence, right up there with Lawrence Durrell, Rónán, is from page 119. There was a valve in some choices that allowed you in but never out. Or if out, then never out and back to where you had been before. I love that sentence, and I'd like you to talk about it.
Yeah, well, I think that's Marie-Thérèse talking about her life. And Marie-Thérèse is a woman in her late 20s. She's separated from her partner and is raising Arthur, her 7-year-old child, on her own. And she's reflecting on where she's at now. Like, once you have a family, once you have children, you can't undo that. And sometimes actually in life, it's good to have choices you can't undo. You get to a point where you have to, because that forces you to confront things about yourself that you can't walk away from. But the broader point in the book, and like a lot of these lines, even though one character might say them, it's pointing to something wider, is that in your head, you can keep retelling stories, you can keep reliving conversations, you can keep revisiting them, almost with the fantasy of fixing them. But there's no audience for those. There's nobody listening to those. The sad fact of adult life is that most of your grievances, there isn't really a parliament of people waiting to say, that's terrible, let's change it. When you're a child, you run into your parents and say, Mommy, that person, Sean, hit me. And there's somebody you can bring that to. As an adult, you don't have that. So what happens is that people just dig deeper grooves in their own personal story, going over and over the same stuff. But you can never get back. You can never, there's no second take. So really what that quote is about, looking at where she is at in life, but also making a broader point about where people go when there's stuff in their life that they've no choice but to confront.
One of your fabulous preoccupations in your debut, Leonard and Hungry Paul, and also in Panenka, is male friendship. That's not something that one reads about very much in fiction. Yeah, it's interesting. I think, like in Leonard and Hungry Paul, it was very much a two-piece, a sort of two-part, two-hander. I wanted deliberately to write about a group dynamic. And Panenka, for those who haven't read the book, he does hang out in this cafe bar with a bunch of his friends. And one thing that interests me about male friendship in a group context is the way it's not like when my wife meets her friends, she goes and she comes back and says, well, Sandra's mother's doing very well and Barbara's daughter is doing very well. I come back and she'll say, oh, how's Mike's wife? She had that operation. I say, oh, we didn't talk about that. So people they sort of share their opinions and all that stuff that's going around in their head. They sort of bring it to this, this group where they sort of talk through stuff, but they don't know a huge amount about each other's private lives. And I wanted to try and get the sort of the rhythm and the dynamics of people interrupting each other, of the banter, of how it's sparked off, and how people sort of settle in, play roles in the group, and to sort of see. And also for Panenka, I think it's important to get a sense of characters. You have to put them in different types of settings. So different characters bring out different sides to the main character. So you're getting to experience them in a more rounded way. But male friendship, yeah, I don't know why it's not. It's one of the puzzles for me. Maybe I just haven't read enough, but one of the puzzles for me in modern literature, even though we'd all accept it's been dominated by male writers, there aren't many positive male characters in literature. When you say, and this came up over and over again when I was doing, say, book club discussions with Leonard and Hungry Paul, there were very few men in the book clubs, and they would say, finally, we got to read a book where the guy wasn't an asshole.
So I wanted to show a more sort of natural sort of perspective of, and I'm sure my wife was quite interested because she obviously can't eavesdrop on these. She kind of thought it was interesting. See, also that's what men are like when they get together. So I just wanted to sort of show that sort of environment and how you can have a very actually kind of close friendship without actually it being too much about the personal details of your life.
And yes, I love the scene set in at Vincent's. Is it a cafe or cafe bar?
Cafe bar, yeah.
Cafe bar, yeah.
Somewhere on the rich spectrum between those two extremes, I think is what it says, something like that.
And yet the standalone piece that I just thought was just a tour de force is about at another nightclub, which is there's only one scene that happens in the novel. It's chapter 17, Bingos. And so I'd like you to tell us about Baba, am I pronouncing it right? Baba, and where he gets his name from. And then he throws the heterosexual male equivalent of a hissy fit and leaves Vincent's for a while. And so Panenka meets him at this very noisy other club. And I love that opening paragraph about bingos. But tell us a little bit about Baba. And then when you're ready, please read that.
Yeah, Baba, it's a nickname he has because he constantly talks about how he has 2 degrees. Now he has a BA, an ordinary BA, and then he has an honors BA. So his friends or his sort of nemesis in the group, Anthony, constantly puts him down and says, well, actually, it's really just 1 degree. One's a progression from the other. Whereas he constantly, he's a man of learning. So he sits at the bar wearing his glasses. He's been reading the same copy of Montaigne's essays forever, not making much progress on it. But he sort of sits on the fringe of their conversation and sort of chips in with his own sort of speeches and observations, so never fully partaking. And at one stage, he does storm out, and Vincent is kind of a rundown, nothing sort of bar. It's been neglected over many years. Where there's a line that it's that sort of very male, economizing self-neglect. And so Baba, who teaches, I suppose he has a Sean Mooney job. He's teaching, English, or he's teaching the local language to people who are sort of who come to the town, who are working, and just need to kind of bear the bare essentials. So he's the kind of guy, a frustrated intellectual, and he storms off and finds himself somewhere else to read his Montaigne, but picks this appalling, garish, Hooters type sports bar, and that's where. And it's one of the points of that chapter is that Panenka meets somebody halfway through the novel, and she starts to have an effect on him. And this is one of the chapters where you start to see that he's the one who reaches out to Baba. That effect, that he actually has care inside them, and he does take these sort of steps to go out and bring Baba back within the fold. So there are certain things there are certain subtle changes in Panenka's personality, or sides to him that come out a bit more once he's kind of had that influence of somebody who means something to him. So I just read the opening, which gives you a sense of what this awful place Bingos is like. Bingos was what they would call in America a sports bar. It had large screens on the walls like fake windows, and was lit by garish blue strip lights that made the place feel like an aquarium. For all their luminescence, the lights only seemed to illuminate themselves, meaning that anyone sitting at the bar trying to read had to concentrate right at the edge of their headache threshold. Ostensibly, it was a place for watching sports, but the reality was that the sports were purely there to create an atmosphere and to provide a theme for the place, along with the crucified registration plates on the walls and the glass cases of what might be called memorabilia, though they belonged to nobody's memories in particular. Seneca fans never went there. It was an after-work drinking hole for unfussy water buffaloes with loosened ties, a place where loud people could hang out together like they were normal, a place where white clothes glowed and where detergent showed up on dark clothes, and a place where a middle-aged man who considered himself urbane and open-minded, yet who was often disappointed by his fellow man, could read the same translation of Montaigne that he had been reading for many months through his spare glasses with his old prescription.
That's just a gorgeous piece of writing. I mean, that is just Rónán Hession at the height of his powers. I drew a little heart symbol beside it. So thank you for reading that. And I also have a personal question about Baba. I just wondered, later that same night, Panenka has to help him get home because I think he's had too much to drink, and he sees his place for the first time. And I'm just wondering if watching my channel and the occasional glimpse of my apartment gave you any inspiration for Baba's apartment.
Not at all. Your place is a very, it's a, a literary cave of knowledge.
Literary, yeah, the equivalent of his place. Yeah. Oh my God, that was hilarious. What a gorgeous cover. Tell us about the cover art.
Yeah, we had originally come up with a different cover, which was a Calcresa mask, which is a form of, it's sort of a face-like metal mask that was used by Roman soldiers in a particular battle in Germany. And it looks a bit, if you know the statuette for the BAFTA Awards, it's a bit like that. And obviously looking at the sort of iron mask motif. But, my publisher and I, we'd agreed on it. And then he came back and said, are we really sure about this? There's something makes it look a bit like a sort of history book. And I said, yeah, do you know what, you're right. And I went looking online for a piece of art. I kind of had an instinct that a sort of abstract portrait of a male would work. And on the Saatchi website, Saatchi, aside from being like a famous art collector, he has there's a forum online which is used for a lot of young artists to sort of sell their work. And I came across, after a bit of searching, this cover image, which is by a Hungarian painter called János Huszti. So he's a youngish painter, not anyway well known. And I spoke to Blue Moose, my publisher, and said, look, subject to not costing too much, can I approach this guy? So I contacted the gallery. They put me in touch with the artist, and I explained what I was doing. I explained who I was, and I was a writer, and I explained a bit about the book and why I thought his image would work, and would he be open to us using it? And he was very happy to do that. So we licensed the image from him, and it's been a really, when we sort of showed the cover image of the book, and a lot of people have really responded to it. And I just felt when I looked at it, it just really spoke to me, because if you can see, having read the opening chapter and about the iron mask, it sort of captures that sort of sense of, I think, sort of trauma and sort of sadness that sort of Panenka carries in his life. So I think it's worked out really well as a cover.
It's perfect. It's perfect. I think that's enough of a taste. Everybody go buy it. I just finished reading it yesterday. It's a fantastic novel. I recommend it very highly. And I'm so delighted to be talking about it with Rónán. So what's next? I read somewhere, I think it was the National Enquirer or something, that you've already got a title for your third novel.
Yeah, my I won't say too much about it, but it's a novel called Ghost Mountain. So I'm going to start working on it in the new year. And I wrote a short story last year called The Translator's Funeral that was published by the Irish Times. And that was kind of a dry run for the sort of style I want to use in Ghost Mountain. So very sort of almost fable-like, almost sort of very strong storytelling sort of style to it, and a very sort of sharp, truncated sort of style. It's still sort of gathering. I have, the sketch of it in my mind. I kind of know how it's going to feel. So I'm going to start working on it next year. So I think it'll be a lot of sort of shorter chapters. I'm going to just have a lot of fun with it, I think. And I've also got an idea for a further one, which is sort of a working title called Love in a Long Winter, which is something I'm going to...
What was the working title?
Love in a Long Winter.
Love in a Long Winter.
Which is another thing I sort of... So what usually happens with these is that, a long time before you work on them, you get a sort of concept and a title, and it becomes like a sort of a spare room. And every time you have an idea, you just sort of throw an idea in there and you don't do anything about it. And as you go along, you're walking down the street and say, oh, that would work. And then you throw stuff in there. And then eventually when you come to write it, you just open the spare room and it's just like a ton of stuff in chaos. And you say, okay, I'm going to try to make a book out of this. That's what happened with the first two.
And you're going to stick to your schedule? You're like basically a novel a year? Can we count on that?
Well, this one has been, I did one in 2019. This one's 2021. Okay. Ghost Mountain was due to be 2023, but I've pushed it back a year because I'm taking this year off writing. Even though it's been a busy year, so it doesn't feel like a year off so far. But the second half of the year, I want to, when I wrote music, I had 5 years between each album. And you need to have, I'm very conscious of not burning out both from physical energy, but also creative energy. I don't write books that are the same as each other or just writing a book because I have an idea. You need to sort of move on as a person a bit, and then you sort of new stuff to sort of express and talk about. So I want to allow some time for that.
Okay, I'll wait. Let's end with, say, one book that you're just dying to tell me and all my subscribers about, that you've read recently or are reading now, or...
Yeah, well, I suppose it's one. Well, can I cheat and say two?
Oh, yes.
But one writer I've been reading for the past month, and I know you've read Trieste, and possibly Doppelganger, Daša from Croatia. I've spent the last month reading a lot of books from the Balkan region, so from Slovenia, Bosnia, Croatia in particular. And Daša she has about 5, I think, books that are translated into English. So I've read that one's called Leica format,
Which I've never heard of. So yeah, I've never heard of that one.
It was hard to get, and all her books have just been recently republished by Maclehose, so that's a new edition. But EEG, Belladonna are the 2 better known of her books, and then Trieste, of course, and then Doppelganger, which is a shorter novel. Her preoccupations are they're very deep thinking books, preoccupations around the effect of World War II around Southeastern Europe. And also I think given the way the world is now, there's a phrase you sometimes hear used called the Balkanization of an issue, which is when things become very fractured and divided. And I think everything I read about Daša Drndić and everything I read from that area gives me a note of caution around the idea of using identity as the basis for constructing society. The dangers of that and how that's been used by right-wing politics for a long time, and the risks of framing liberal or left-wing politics on the same thing. It really gives me pause. I don't have answers on that, but it's making me really think about it. The divisive effect of that and how it's so easily appropriated by negative forces. So I've been immersing myself in the literature of that area, learning more about the history of that area, because I feel, it was in my lifetime. I remember watching the news when the Balkan War was going on in the 90s. I didn't pay enough attention to it, to my shame. But I'm really feel there are a lot of lessons there about how we can avoid problems in the sort of next 10, 20 years around Europe. And I think it's time to revisit those. Another writer I just want to mention, because I don't think I've mentioned her to you before, and I think she is incredible, is Bette Howland. The book won't look at this. This is called W3. This is a proof copy the publisher sent me.
You have not. I think maybe I've seen you tweet about it, is all. Or somebody tweeting about it, yeah.
She was a writer. She's a brilliant American writer. She only wrote 3 books, and then she had mental health problems, and she was a single mother and suffered a lot with poverty and money problems. And she kind of was basically disappeared off the radar. But people like Saul Bellow were very, very big fans of hers. So her book was sort of rediscovered really by a publisher called, is it Open Press or something like that? I'll try to find the name of it. But basically her books were rediscovered about 10 years ago and republished in the US, and they're only becoming available in sort of Europe now through Picador. She had a collection that came out last year called Blue in Chicago, which is fantastic. She is an amazing writer.
You put that one on my radar and I bought it. I haven't gotten to it yet, but I'm really looking forward to getting to it.
And this one is called W3 and it's out in June. And it's about her time spent in a psychiatric hospital. She had young children at the time and everything just became too much for her. And the pressures of motherhood and it's her observations there. And you were saying earlier about sentimentality. This is entirely unsentimental. An unromanticized, unsentimentalized account, but also not willfully dark either. So it's her. She has a brilliant ability in just a sentence to create a whole pen picture of somebody. And she writes. She's so smart. Herself and Daša Drndić, I think, are 2 world-class writers. And I think so. I just wanted to mention those 2.
Awesome. And I think I read Drndić's Trieste last year and just gutted me. Yeah. Incredible. Excellent recommendations as always. And you have a standing offer to come back for like a full 45-minute, 3-hour chat about recent reading or whatever. We'll keep this one a little shorter. So I'm just going to end by saying thank you, Rónán, for Panenka. And thank you for enriching my channel.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's always a great source of reading inspiration for me. And the Friday reads, I always look forward to when I'm on my lunch break on a Friday. Friday Reads is a regular feature, so I always enjoy it. So it's always lovely to chat to you about books, Sean, and we'll chat again soon.
And to end on a typical Sean the Book Maniac note, thank you for never commenting when those many times where I have toothpaste on my lip. Thanks, Rónán.
Thanks, Sean. Great to see you. Bye.